Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
Bob Anthony.
And I'm Alan Singer.
Expert historian, educator, Alan Singer. Veteran journalist, Robert Anthony, and Eric V. Tait Jr. with you again for another session of Media Watch, brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Productions, Zoom, and hopefully Manhattan Neighborhood Network, maybe next Monday, because we're taping the first Wednesday in January, the new series, new year, new show, first show of the year. And lots of stuff to cover, and we won't be able to get to it all, and we need to put it in perspective as opposed to blow by blow. And we mentioned the fact that we wanted to take a look at what was happening to journalists covering the Hamas-Israeli war, and all of us went looking to see who was covering what. We've seen stuff from the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders. I saw something from The Guardian, but the numbers are still atrocious as far as civilian deaths. I believe CPJ, Committee to Protect Journalists, quoting as of January 3rd, 21,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza, and 1,200 people have been killed in Israel. But the horrendous total for us as journalists is the fact that in a 4-week, if we say January 7th, 4-week span, 77 journalists or media type people, media related workers trying to help cover this war, have been killed and died. And so the question that we raised on that story that crossed us from the Washington Post 2 weeks ago was, are they being deliberately targeted by the Israeli Defense Forces? And my take is the number is too high for it to be accidental. But Alan, I think you want to try to keep it in a different perspective. Give us your take, just because we'll do numbers after. Go.
According again to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 68 journalists and media workers have died since October 7th. 61 of the people killed were Palestinian, 3 were Lebanese. 4 Israeli journalists were among the 1,200 people, mostly civilians, who were killed by Hamas in the October attack. This is my take. I'm looking at this, and I think part of the high number of journalists killed is because these Palestinian journalists are embedded within Palestinian communities. And there's been indiscriminate bombings that cannot be targeted. And as a result, with the large number of civilian deaths, you also have a large number of journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists actually has a list on their website of the journalists who were killed. And again, typically, I'm not sure how to pronounce the names, but Ola Atala is a Palestinian freelance journalist who writes for a number of media outlets. She was killed by an Israeli airstrike on her house. And in the attack, also killed were 9 members of her family. So what we're looking at is really indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets. And I think that the journalists who are trying to cover what's going on become very, very vulnerable.
It's I agree with you in the just the lack of precision in the attacks on Gaza, in the demolition of entire apartment buildings to go after maybe a cluster of soldiers. The collateral damage is just beyond anything I've ever seen. And I've been reading reports about communications blackouts. And when you do that, you go after buildings that might house journalism organizations. They tend to be around the places where they can get communications out. But yeah, it's the indiscriminate nature of the war which bothers me. and the numbers of journalists dying is, you know, it breaks my heart, and I can't believe that what Israel says in terms of we're being careful. It doesn't seem like they're being careful.
But what I've got from the last link that you sent, Bob, is actually, and this is the CPJ story that I'm actually referring to on my cell phone. 77 journalists and media workers were confirmed dead, not 68, Alan, 77
Right.
confirmed dead. 70 Palestinian, 4 Israeli, 3 Lebanese. 16 journalists were reported injured. 31 journalists were reported missing.
Yeah.
21 journalists were reported arrested. Arrested. Now, who's doing the arresting? It ain't the folks in Gaza. Okay? So, multiple assaults, threats, cyber attacks, censorship, and killings of family members. Family members of these journalists. And because of this report, the fact that they're targeting family members, and there's another story about an Al Jazeera reporter, cameraman, who had received warnings from the Israeli Defense Force, and not long after that, his family was bombed, killed, wiped out. That is not coincidence as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not afraid to sit here and say this is a result of indiscriminate bombing, etc. This, based on these reports, look very much like targeted killings. Remember the guy we talked about on that story that the Washington Post ran 2 weeks ago, where he said, full journalist regalia, everything, helmet, vest, press. He could tell an Israeli Defense Force sniper actually targeted him. This is him reporting about what he suffered. And when folks tried to come and rescue him, the folks couldn't get in because the attacks were on the people trying to rescue him. So I'm sorry. I know people are up in arms about 21,000 civilians being dead, as well they should be. But deliberately targeting journalists, whether you want to say no, it's not, whether you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, the numbers that I'm going with is I decided to do a cross check. The Syrian civil war going on since 2011. If you believe the Syrian Journalists Association, 153 journalists were killed in that 12-year span from 2011 to 2023. 153. Let me quote from what's the Journalist Center in the Middle East. The Doha Center for Media Freedom has documented 110 professional or citizen journalists who have died during the Syrian civil war. Okay, Syrian journalists say 153, but in 12 years, that's the total. In 4 months, we got 77 dead journalists, and we got the families of journalists being killed. Something, what do they say? Something doesn't smell right here. What is that for phrase we used to? Something's rotten in Denmark. Whatever is going on, it doesn't bode well for Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces. I'm going to put it that way because I can't really, the reports indicate it, but not being on the scene. And like you were saying, Bob, how many people want to put journalists in an area where all this bombing is going on and people are dying indiscriminately? Why put your journalists at risk? And that's why the bulk of these journalists who are dead are of Middle Eastern ancestry, because Western journalists aren't dumb. They know if they go in there, they're going to end up dead. And so that's why we have what we have. So,
and just to quote from the exact same page you were quoting from the Committee to Protect Journalists, quote, more journalists have been killed in the first 10 weeks of the Israel-Gaza war than have ever been killed in a single country over an entire year, according to CPJ data. So these numbers are just out of hand.
So do you think that they're targeting journalists as if they're somehow embedded in Hamas?
I think they're targeting journalists because they don't want the true nature of that war to be reported. That's basically what's that dictum when people, dictators and autocrats say, first take the media,
Mm.
take control of the narrative, then do anything else you want. And I think what we were referring to before, Bob, about a blackout, what was there a New York Times report that talked about this blackout without attributing who might be causing this internet blackout? We don't want to call names because we've got no proof. The New York Times probably didn't want to ascribe blame either, but who has all the infrastructure and the ability to cause a blackout?
I mean, the Times reported that basically the blackout was caused by the bombing, by the attacks, by the buildings coming down. But, they didn't, you can't say that the attacks were meant to cut off communications, that they can't extend themselves to say that.
Right.
But just the lack of communications and the lack to get information out, that by itself, on top of the deaths of the journalists, is troubling, to say the least.
So, harking back to my former days in the military, if I were launching a war and I was going after an enemy, I'm going to knock out all their communications to make sure they can't communicate with each other and they can't communicate with the rest of the world. That's the way I would do this. So now, if I extrapolate to the folks who are conducting this war, I'm going to think logically, militarily, who's going to cause a blackout? The guys who are conducting the war. Well, we can't prove it. Okay. All right. So, but to wrap up that part of it, Alan, put it in perspective about what maybe the United Nations or whomever can or cannot do, may or may not have been trying to do to deal with the humanitarian crisis that's going on there.
Look, the United Nations and a number of NGOs have organized to get supplies into Gaza because they estimate that half the population, over 1 million people, are facing famine, starvation. And it's a human crisis of an astounding proportion. Israel claims they've let the food supplies in. People from the UN and others have claimed they've interfered. It's very hard to say. Part of the issue is that Israel is checking everybody to make sure they're not Hamas and to make sure that they're not sneaking in things that Hamas could use. So what ends up happening is because of what the Israeli strategy there to crush Hamas, it becomes very difficult to get relief into Gaza. There was an interesting story in the Times. They did an interview with a teacher who spoke fluent English because he had studied in the United States. He and his family were fleeing Gaza, trying to get to Egypt, and they had authorization because their youngest son was born in the United States. They were stopped. He was stopped by Israeli forces and held for 15 hours, and he was beaten because they treated him as if he was Hamas. I think when this war is over, there's going to be an accounting because there's so much, as you've said, that is just unacceptable that's taking place. What Hamas did at the beginning is grotesque and unacceptable, but so is the things that we have seen Israel doing to civilian populations.
So, Bob, you were talking about Reporters Without Borders before corroborating what CPG was saying about numbers and the possibility of targeting. I believe the Reporters Without Borders folks have put in an official request for whatever the international organization is to seriously investigate, launch an investigation into all these high numbers of journalists that have been killed. So they are seriously concerned that this isn't just discriminatory, accidental deaths of these journalists and their families.
And for those who don't know, these two organizations, CPJ and the other one,
Without Borders, yeah.
Yeah, and these are not new organizations. There's no political affiliation. These are respected or international organizations, which I have, relied upon for decades. And so the research they do isn't, they don't pick sides. They just pick facts. And that's what they're offering us. And the numbers speak for themselves in both cases.
Yeah, I agree. With that, we need to segue to closer to home stuff. but high on the agenda is whether or not we look at do we want to deal with the January 6th Trump ballot stuff and the coverage of, so we know that the Colorado Supreme Court bumped Trump from the Republican ballot. We know that the Maine Secretary of State said, based on her ruling of the law and her job, bumped him from the Maine ballot. Now, Alan, you know the numbers. There are like 17 more cases pending. My take, though, is to take a look at what the reaction was, because you remember the Colorado Supreme Court came out with their issue, and then all of a sudden the state police or officials in Colorado had to start finding protection for the justices.
Yeah, the FBI is investigating the threats made against the state Supreme Court justices in Colorado.
Bob, didn't something similar like that happen to the Secretary of State in Maine? I mean, wasn't she doxxed? There was a big story about her and her workers and the threats they were facing, wasn't there?
Either cyber, social media attacks, and not I don't think it got to the level of swatting, where you call in a false report.
They did,
but they did get to that level.
Her home, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, I wasn't 100% sure. Yes, and that's when you call in a false police report. Basically for the sake of harassment.
She was on a couple of media outlets talking about the fact that she had more threatening phone calls than she had threatening emails. That's how hot under the collar the MAGA folk were about what she did, based on her interpretation of what her job was, what the law was, etc. And so I'm guessing that the FBI, like they did in Colorado, are probably looking into how many damn threats she faced based on the fact that she just said, no, he is not eligible to be on the primary ballot for the state of Maine. And so, interestingly enough, I haven't seen that many media stories picking up on those threats and how serious those threats have been, because she was very adamant about the fact that they were targeting not just her and her family, but the workers in her office, that it was a direct interference in the democratic process, and that it was designed to intimidate people, to keep them from doing their jobs and making the democracy function properly. And she was upset about that. But she said, that's not going to stop me, or it shouldn't stop anyone from doing their job the way they see it's correct.
I mean, part of the problem is the incendiary language of Donald Trump. And so he's screaming on the media, he's screaming on the rallies, making all sorts of accusations against anybody who raises legal questions. And so that his followers then respond, well, that's what they did January 6th. That's why he is accused of fomenting an insurrection. And he continues to do it to this day. Every speech, every tweet on whatever tweeting device he uses is incendiary and threatens the legal system and threatens democracy.
Yeah. Interesting enough, we thought we wouldn't, but that's a perfect segue real quick to those three women who said this man's a threat to our country. The three former staffers in Trump's White House, all women, all young women, have the guts and the gumption to sit down for an in-depth interview to try to warn the country that this man is a clear and present danger. That's that phrase, clear and present danger to the functioning of our democracy and to the running of our country the way it has been run in the past. Cassidy Hutchinson, Sarah, I don't remember the name. Alan, you may have them.
Sarah Matthews and Alyssa Griffin.
Right. And my hats off, kudos to those young women, because they probably going to end up getting all kinds of threats themselves for speaking out publicly about this man and how dangerous he is to the country. But they had the guts and the gumption, should I say the balls? The bottom line is they seem to have it. The men that used to work for him, well, maybe one or two of them mumble something, but wasn't it Bill Barr that came out with some weird interpretation op-ed piece saying that the legal challenges that are trying to get him off the ballot or prevent him from being on the ballot would fail miserably and legally because it smacks of elites trying to interfere with the election and that the general public should be doing that? Alan, talk to us about the general public doing that. What did Mitch McConnell say when they could have barred him by finding him guilty in the Senate? Talk to us about that.
Again, with the Republican position in general is let the people vote. Keep them on the ballot, let the people vote. Part of the difficulty is this has never happened before in the history of the United States. After the Civil War and the 14th Amendment, so that former Confederates who had sworn loyalty to the United States and then committed treason could not be voted back into government by Confederates. And Jeff Davis had been the United States Senator. I think he was also a cabinet member. I mean, so these people, Robert E. Lee was a general in the United States Army. They committed treason. And in their insurrection in the Civil War. So in its wisdom, the United States House and Senate said they cannot be in government again.
Not just that, anyone.
Anybody, right. They didn't just list them. It said anybody who commits insurrection against the Constitution of the United States after having sworn an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States cannot serve in office. Now, I have to say, that's what Donald Trump did that. Now, it's not clear how ultimately the Supreme Court is going to respond, because the Supreme Court is very right-wing with 3 Trump appointees. And the talk is that John Roberts, the Chief Justice, is going to try to have it resolved on a technicality, but it's going to find a technicality that will allow Trump to run for office.
Yeah, that's not, he might try, but that don't mean it's correct. And so
doesn't mean it's correct. It just means, look, that's what they did in 2000 with Bush versus Gore. They voted 5-4 to make George Bush president of the United States on the technicality.
And that's exactly what bothers me about the Supreme Court, that they will find a way to back out and not be responsible for knocking Trump off the ballot. They will find something that they can do to avoid that. And I'm not a constitutional scholar, but when I hear Bill Barr, former Attorney General, talking about his view on Trump's eligibility, I'm like, oh, well, what law school did you go to? I'm not brilliant when it comes to that, but I know something. And it just seems like he's just taking the Republican path and just saying, keep him on the ballot for the sake of protecting his party.
Yeah, I always say I read good. And I read the 14th Amendment, and that's what it says.
Yes.
In
black and white.
We read well with you. Indeed.
Yes. And just to keep us on pace, we have about 3 minutes left.
Which is time enough, I guess, for one last entity. Before we run out of time, this whole right-wing assault on education has come to the fore because the president of Harvard, former president, submitted her resignation. Last name Gay, first name
Claudine Gay, yes.
And she pretty much said, look, they've attacked my educational rigor, my desire for educational rigor, and then they've cloaked it in an animus of racism, whatever, the racial animus that's surrounding this. And so I'm going to step down.
But for those who don't know, she's an African-American woman. So
first Black president ever appointed to run Harvard, which supposedly is the preeminent higher educational institution in the country. That depends on who you talk to, but anyway, the reputation is it's supposed to be. And so a lot of folks didn't like a Black woman running that college to begin with. And then the conservatives actually launched a campaign using that congressional testimony as the match to try to get rid of her. Now, she weathered the storm initially, and her board and all the folks that put her in place and appointed her said, no, we looked at all those credentials. We looked at the plagiarism allegations. And so we don't think she should step down. But then they came back again and started launching more assault on her writings and her capabilities. And so she said, enough is enough. And so she resigned. But Christopher Rufo,
she did a bad job at the congressional hearing. She went in to have a discussion, and Elise Stefanik just wanted sound bites.
Precisely.
And basically, she was unprepared for the level of attack.
Right. Look, none of them were. None of those three presidents were. That was a right-wing assault. And guess what? They were following Christopher Rufo, the playbook guy for using critical race theory as the assault weapon to disrupt educational school boards, curriculum, the whole bit about teaching anything about slavery, institutional racism, curriculum that actually reflects what the country was all about. And with that, with him as their playbook guide, they were successful. He went on Twitter, X, and said, scalped, as his way of crowning his victory in getting her to resign. So this is a right-wing assault against higher education that they think is too leftist and too liberal. That's where we are today.
And with that, we're just about there.
Okay, folks. Well, we have run out of time. This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And I'm Alan Singer. Thank you very much for having me today. I thought it was a really good discussion.
Thank you, folks. Glad we made this one again. New year, more to come. We'll catch you the next time, folks. Stay safe.